What if I told you that the New Testament is the most well-documented text in the entire ancient world? Meaning, the New Testament is the ancient text with the highest amount of material evidence to reconstruct its original wording. And I'm not talking about theology, I'm not talking about religion, I'm not talking about apologetics. No, I'm talking about historical math. Most ancient books we value today survived in 8, perhaps 10 copies, some of them actually in only 5. But the New Testament? Well, we have thousands of copies. Greek manuscripts, ancient translations, fragments coming from every corner of the empire, and this is statistically abnormal. This reality should not exist at this scale, no sir. So when someone says you can't trust the text of the New Testament, well, that sentence actually ignores the historical and scientific fact that the New Testament, the text of the New Testament, is the richest data environment of all antiquity. And that changes everything. Most people imagine the New Testament came down to us intact, as if the early church protected one perfect copy for 2,000 years. But that's not how God built this astonishment story of the text of the New Testament. The truth, which might feel strange, perhaps almost unbelievable, is that the New Testament survived precisely because no one controlled it. That's right. There was no central vault in Jerusalem, no imperial archive in Rome, no single mega library in Alexandria protecting the original. No. The New Testament simply spread. Thousands of churches, thousands of copies in different languages, in different countries, passing through empires that rose and expanded and collapsed and disappeared from history. And because the New Testament spread, well, it survived. Exactly. And here's the thing few people realize. The New Testament is the most attested text of the entire ancient world. The New Testament has more evidence than any ancient text, more manuscripts, more ancient translations, more external citations, more comparative data than any other work of antiquity. Homer's stories, Achilles, Odysseus, Agamemnon, well, we have found around 1,800 manuscripts written around 400 years after the originals. What about Plato? We have almost 250 manuscripts that were written around 1,200 years after the originals. What about Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars? Very important, right? We have 10 copies written around 1,000 years after the originals. Aristotle's Poetics, the oldest known work of literary theory, we have found 5 manuscripts written around 1,400 years after the originals. Now here's my question. You believe these texts are important, right? Homer, Plato tells the story of Socrates, Aristotle, Julius Caesar. Well, and they should be considered very important because they are part of the foundation of Western civilization. Well then, if you do the math, you see that all of these texts combined have 2,065 manuscripts. That is, 2,065 pieces of evidence that someone actually wrote these texts in history, right? Now, here's the thing. If you find these texts relevant, just wait to see how many evidence we have of the text of the New Testament. So far, we have found in Greek alone, okay, 5,800 manuscripts of the New Testament. That's right. This is a 5,800 pieces of evidence that someone actually wrote these texts, plus 10,000 Latin manuscripts, plus 9,300 manuscripts in other languages, Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, Gothic. That is more than 25,000 manuscripts, 25,000 pieces of evidence about the existence of the New Testament text. That is 10 times more evidence than every other foundational ancient text combined. And there is more. The oldest manuscript of the New Testament, such as some portions of the Gospel of John, were reading around just 30 years, perhaps 25 years after the original Gospel written by John himself. You need to understand that no other ancient text ever written, Homer, Plato, Aristotle, Julius Caesar, Tacitus, you name it, any of them, gets even close to the amount of evidence for the text of the New Testament. And here comes the counterintuitive part. The more manuscripts we have, the more variants we find, right? Of course. What are variants in a text? Well, there are small differences between ancient manuscripts of the same text. Differences produced during the manual copying process, like word choice, spelling, word order, regional adjustments, small details added by scribes.
But that sounds bad, right?
Actually, no, it's not. It's incredible. It's wonderful because instead of one perfect copy locked in a museum, we received an ocean of evidence capable of reconstructing the original text. And here's the final point. No central doctrine of the New Testament depends on variants or is challenged by any form of textual alteration. Resurrection of Jesus? No. The deity of Jesus? Of course no. Trinity? No. Church? Gospel? No. All remain intact. The New Testament did not survive because one group protected it perfectly. No, of course not. The New Testament survived because it multiplied without control. It was distributed, it was scattered to every possible place. It survived by explosion. And today, almost 20 centuries later, this is part of the very evidence of the reliability of the text of the New Testament. So, this is important. When you look at the text of the New Testament, you are not looking at a fragile relic that survived by accident. No, you are staring at a universe of manuscripts so absurdly massive that history itself is forced to take this magnificent text seriously. The New Testament was not preserved by an elite. The New Testament was preserved by ordinary people, ordinary communities, in ordinary places, ordinary churches copying the text without stopping. And this is exactly where the second shock begins. This explosion of manuscripts only worked because of the language of the New Testament was written in. Not elite classical Greek, but the Greek of the streets, the Greek of the markets, of sailors, of everyday life, koine, common, accessible Greek. I will show you how this linguistic choice changed the destiny of Christianity and the text of the New Testament forever in the next episode.